With their debut release, Mortal Shell, Cold Symmetry brings us an intense experience that captures the genre's essence like no other game to date. My name is Paulo, and I'll tell you why in our video review. The gaming industry is enamored with Souls-like, a relatively new and absolutely captivating genre, and consequently, the market is flooded year after year with clones and attempts at capturing its slippery essence. At first glance, Mortal Shell looked to be just another imitator, spectacular appearance in the trailers, but on closer scrutiny, disappointing. But now, after spending over 20 hours and in the middle of the New Game Plus, I can state that nothing could be further from the truth. Cold Symmetry is a studio made up of 15 people who took almost 3 years to complete their first game. They finished developing it thanks to a temporary exclusivity agreement with Epic Store, and they poured all their experience and understanding of the genre into this game. Mortal Shell wears its influences on its sleeve and pays homage to the Dark Souls saga whenever it gets the chance, but it makes good use of the mechanics that define the genre while incorporating concepts of its own. We start the quest as Foundling, a faceless creature with no personal traits whatsoever, who advances through a dreamlike setting that doubles up as a tutorial, and is then swallowed by a giant wormfish. We crawl through the fish's skeletal remains and climb up its stinking throat, until we come out into a swampy forest that forms the central area of the adventure. The artistic side is somber and oppressive, and the violence of the enemies ultimately generates the sensation of fragility that characterizes this genre. But Mortal Shell ups the ante, and to add a shocking level of difficulty to the first hours, it doesn't tell us what the items we find are for. Foundling is learning to live, and we have to use classic trial and error until we understand how this world works. Is this toadstool poisonous or healing? What's this golden bell for? Should I spend this mysterious item to satisfy my curiosity, or should I keep it? The decision is always ours, and although it's true that eventually it will be a question of Googling it, part of the charm lies in accepting the consequences. Mortal Shell is an independent game, and Cold Symmetry used this to their advantage. Instead of planning a vast world full of bosses and enemies, they decided to create a compact, carefully made experience. This doesn't mean that the scenarios are small, but rather that the whole adventure takes place in 4 large areas, full of details, and with dangers lurking around every corner. Everything that happens in Mortal Shell is a mystery, and at least in the first hours, every step we take raises more and more questions. How do you open the chests? How do you get to new zones? All the answers come as we advance, which is why the beginning is so tortuous, because even those of us who are used to the genre are taken out of our comfort zone, and we become beginners again, even if it's just for a few hours. As we explore, we find monoliths that give us a glimpse of some issue in particular, maybe the route to a new level, the location of a character, or clues to find new weapons or shells. As the title suggests, the gameplay is constructed around the shells, which are the bodies of fallen warriors, which Foundling can inhabit to use their unique qualities. Mortal Shell doesn't let us move up a level the traditional way, but instead forces us to adjust to the fixed stats of the 4 shells, which are like pre-made characters. The first we find is the most basic, and the other 3 play roles of tank, high health, low stamina, and head-on attack skills, rogue, low health, high stamina, and debuff skills, and scholar, balanced in stats, focused on parrying, and weapon skill. Each shell has skills set to be unlocked, which also tells us a little about the character's background, and adds another piece to the puzzle of the narrative. How we explore depends on the shell we find first. Progress is not linear, and all the zones are accessible from the start. So much freedom added to the labyrinth passages of the initial forest, and the complete uncertainty we get from having no idea where we're going may be disconcerting for some, and probably discouraging for those who aren't die-hard followers of the genre. However, these end up forming the identity of the title, as much as the shells and the combat mechanics. To begin with, we don't have a shield, but we have 3 ways of avoiding attack. We can parry, if we're that kind of skillful player, dodge, or harden. The latter is one of the mechanics that defines the game, as it works as both defense and attack. We can turn into stone just before we're about to be hit and withstand any attack. after which we return to normal. If we harden during our attack animation and the enemy hits us, not only do we negate the damage, but the enemy will also receive a blow from us. Once you understand how it works, the possibilities are numerous. In fact, the shell's skills are closely tied to hardening. Mortal Shell delights in our uncertainty, but the answers start to come when we've defeated the first boss, whichever one that is in our case. Our goal is to take 3 glands to Darkfather. Each one is watched over by a guardian at the end of a temple, and each one represents a new level. So we lose ourselves in the catacombs of a crypt, and we descend into a frozen hell. We come to an abandoned castle full of specters and fire demons, and we visit a huge obsidian cathedral with a vertical design that will leave our jaws on the floor. At the end of each temple, we face off with a boss and recover one of the glands, but the journey back is no less complicated. Cold Symmetry's game does not have shortcuts, at least not on this first run, so the pressure of walking back to the swamp is especially tough, but I'll leave out the details so you can experience it for yourselves. The first run at Mortal Shell lasts about 15 hours, at least in my case. The first hours are full of uncertainty and challenges, but as we find new shells and weapons, everything becomes simpler while retaining a certain balance. An improved weapon means we need fewer strikes to defeat an enemy, but since we can't improve the stats of the shells, we continue to be vulnerable to their attacks. Hardening can prove to be the ace up our sleeve, but if we take it into account how long it takes for the skill to recover, we are sure to fall under the enemy's axe. Even when we're one step from the final boss, if we're not careful, an ambush from 2 or 3 of the initial enemies could kill us in a matter of seconds. And in those moments of fury, Mortal Shell shines through with all its intensity. Of course, an experienced gamer might find ways of breaking the combat and blowing away everything else, but in general, the gameplay stays fresh and challenging to the end. And even on the final straight, we feel that there's still a lot to discover. The NPCs interact differently depending on the shell we have equipped, and at the time of writing this review, I'm still expecting surprises in my first run of New Game Plus. The experience is by no means perfect. Mortal Shell relies too much on ambushes, on enemies spawning from out of nowhere in the middle of some combats, and on practices that clearly generate an artificial difficulty. The parry windows swing between obvious and impossible. The design of the bosses in combat, aside from being visually beautiful, is fun, but their movements are generally easy to dodge, and sometimes even show some kind of bug. However, these are small details in comparison with the rest of the game, and if we cross off from the list those that can be fixed with a future patch, we're left with a couple of trifles that in no way tarnish the experience. On the contrary, the fact that I'm nitpicking means that the most important parts are well done and exceeded my expectations. Mortal Shell is the first Souls-like game to understand the true essence of the genre, and that's why it deserves a place above any other game not developed by From Software. Cold Symmetry have implemented well the mechanics of combat and exploration of a good Souls-like game, but they have also given it an identity of its own through innovation and good use of the tools to hand. Its main victory is the setting, that oppressive climate that prevails throughout the experience and which makes us feel like we're having a completely new adventure, despite it being so closely related to the Souls saga. Its main defect is also its greatest virtue. It does most things so well that when it comes to the bosses, we expect something marvelous that very few games could ever give us. And we find that they're more or less okay, but not fantastic. However, this is one of the most exciting, best executed, and beautiful Souls-like games I've played in the last decade, as if it had been designed for those who don't have 40 hours spare to invest in it. And this is why it gets a score of 8. If you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Follow us on social media and visit www.malditosnerds.com to stay up to date with the latest video game news. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.